The relentless sun of the New Mexico desert beat down on truth or consequences, a town whose quirky name belied its quiet, almost forgotten existence. Here, amidst the sun-baked adobe and the whispering sands, lived Dr. Elias Thorne. Not the doctor, Thorne whose name graced prestigious archaeological journals anymore, but an older, more solitary Elias, a man seemingly lost to the academic world he once inhabited. His office, a cramped, perpetually dusty room above a seldom-visited antique shop, was a testament to his fading relevance. Stacks of yellowed maps and brittle books about forgotten civilizations towered precariously, like ancient ruins themselves. The only sound, besides the creak of his worn desk chair, was the incessant hum of an ancient fan stirring the hot, dry air, and the occasional mournful howl of the desert wind rattling the single, grimy window pane. Elias spent his nights hunched over these relics, his face illuminated by the dim glow of a solitary desk lamp, meticulously annotating papers that few would ever read, pursuing theories that the mainstream had long dismissed. His life, a stark contrast to the lively academic conferences and bustling excavation sites he once frequented, was a quiet, almost painful testament to his chosen isolation and his unwavering, solitary obsession with the past. He cooked simple meals on a sputtering hot plate, often forgetting to eat as the thrill of a new historical obscure detail consumed him. His only companions were the faded photographs of dig sites from decades past and the silent, knowing gaze of his cat, Sphinx, a rescued stray with an uncanny stillness. There was a certain peace in this solitude, a freedom from the intellectual battles and political maneuvering of university life. Yet, a quiet ache persisted, a longing for recognition, a yearning for his unconventional theories, often rooted in local folklore, to be validated by hard science. One sweltering afternoon, Elias, armed with his worn geological hammer and a canvas bag, was meticulously surveying a shallow, almost dried-up creek bed on the outskirts of town. He wasn't looking for grand artifacts. His quest was humbler, a patient search for ancient pottery shards, fragmented whispers of long-lost indigenous cultures that dotted the New Mexico landscape. The sun beat down mercilessly, raising shimmering heat hazes from the cracked earth. The only sounds were the crunch of his boots on the parched ground and the distant buzz of insects. Suddenly, a frustrated shout ripped through the stillness. Elias looked up, squinting against the glare. About a quarter-mile upstream, a large SUV was hopelessly mired in a patch of treacherous quicksand-like silt. A family, a man and two young children, were frantically trying to push the vehicle free, their faces streaked with sweat and fear. The father, visibly panicking, was shouting instructions to his small children, who were clearly terrified, clinging to his legs. The situation was dangerous. The more they struggled, the deeper the SUV sank into the shifting sands. Elias felt an immediate, primal surge of concern. His natural inclination was intellectual, quiet, observational. He wasn't a man for grand gestures or social interaction. His social awkwardness was almost legendary among his former colleagues. Yet the sight of the vulnerable children, their wide eyes reflecting genuine terror, ignited something deeper within him. He possessed an intimate knowledge of this desert, its hidden dangers, its deceptive terrain, a knowledge gained not from textbooks, but from decades of trudging its unforgiving expanse. To ignore their plight would be a betrayal of the very land he revered. Without a moment's hesitation, Elias dropped his bag of precious shards. He moved with a surprising agility for his age, quickly making his way towards the stranded family. He didn't shout, didn't draw attention to himself. He simply arrived, a quiet, reassuring presence amidst the chaos. "Stop pushing," Elias called out, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the father's frantic instructions. "You'll only sink it deeper. The tires just need traction." The father, a local miner named Carlos Ramirez, turned, his eyes wide with a mix of relief and confusion. He didn't recognize the dusty, solitary figure. "We're stuck. We've been here for an hour." Elias, without a word, knelt beside the front tire. He picked up a handful of dry, thorny tumbleweeds, then gestured to Carlos. "We need more. Pack them under the tires, and then we'll rock it. Gently." His instructions were concise, his movements precise. He knew the specific properties of the desert silt, how it behaved when disturbed, and how to create the necessary friction. He patiently demonstrated the technique. His hands, usually accustomed to delicate archaeological tools, now deftly maneuvering branches and rocks. Carlos, though skeptical at first of the old man's unorthodox approach, was desperate. He quickly gathered more tumbleweeds, stuffing them under the wheels as Elias directed. Together, they rocked the SUV. Elias calling out precise timing, slowly, inch by agonizing inch. The tires found purchase. With a final collective shove, the SUV lurched forward, freeing itself from the silty trap. The children, their eyes wide with relief, cheered. Carlos, wiping sweat from his brow, looked at Elias with profound gratitude. "Thank you. You saved us. I thought we were stranded out here for good. How did you know how to do that? I've never seen anyone get a vehicle out of that stuff so easily." Elias offered a faint, almost shy smile. "Just know the land. Son. Been walking it since before you were born." He helped Carlos check the tires, then gathered his tools. This small act of selfless aid, of leveraging his deep, practical knowledge to help those in distress, showcased a profound decency beneath his reclusive exterior, immediately drawing the reader's empathy. He didn't seek praise or reward. He merely saw a problem and applied his unique understanding to solve it. As Carlos finished securing his vehicle, he looked at Elias with a new appreciation. "You really know this land, don't you? Not just the roads, but what's under it. My grandpa used to talk like that. Said the desert had its own secrets, if you knew how to listen." He paused, his gaze drifting towards a distant, shimmering mesa. He used to tell stories, old tribal legends, about a city under the sand, a place where the ancestors saw grand buildings, filled with forgotten treasures, buried centuries ago. Said it was in the Valley of Echoes, a place where strange winds whisper. Carlos, a man deeply rooted in the local traditions and oral histories of his community, spoke with a conviction that resonated with Elias's own fascination for hidden pasts. Elias's polite smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of intense, almost hungry curiosity. A lost city, Roman unlikely, in New Mexico. Yet, Carlos's description of grand buildings and forgotten treasures struck a chord. He remembered a peculiar artifact he'd found years ago, during a solitary survey far to the west of Truth or Consequences. It was a small, intricately carved stone fragment, unlike anything indigenous to the American Southwest. He'd meticulously documented it, puzzled over it, but ultimately filed it away as an anomaly, an unexplainable outlier. It didn't fit any known narrative. But Carlos's words, the specific phrase, grand buildings, suddenly clicked with the unusual material and design of that fragment, now carefully stored in a velvet pouch in his chaotic office. "A city under the sand, you say," Elias murmured, almost to himself, his eyes distant, lost in thought. And in this Valley of Echoes, he turned back to Carlos, a new intensity in his gaze. "I once found something, years ago, a small piece. It didn't belong, not to any Pueblo, or Navajo, or Apache. It was different, European, perhaps, but in the middle of nowhere." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The detail, though small, was a subtle planting of the seed, hinting at a larger mystery, an ancient secret buried beneath the desert floor. It suggested a profound, unacknowledged talent Elias possessed, an almost intuitive connection to the hidden layers of history, waiting to be fully unearthed. The desert, Elias knew, was a vast archive, its secrets guarded by time and swallowed by sand, waiting for someone with the patience and the wisdom to listen to its ancient echoes. The desert wind, a tireless sculptor, continued to carve its subtle narratives into the landscape around truth or consequences. For Elias, the encounter with Carlos Ramirez and the tantalizing mention of a city under the sand had stirred something profound within him. A dormant passion reignited. He found himself poring over his old, dusty maps, cross-referencing local legends with geological surveys. His mind alight with the possibility of a discovery that could finally validate his unconventional approach to archaeology. The quiet hum of his solitary existence, once a comfort, now felt tinged with a new impatience. His fragile sense of peace, however, was about to be profoundly disrupted. Weeks after the quicksand incident, the small town, usually a haven of forgotten tranquility, began to buzz with an unprecedented flurry of activity. A large, well-funded archaeological expedition, sponsored by a prestigious East Coast university, descended upon the outskirts of Truth or Consequences. Their base camp, a gleaming array of high-tech tents and state-of-the-art equipment, stood in stark contrast to Elias's humble boathouse. The arrival of such a prominent team, with their drone surveys and ground-penetrating radar, sent ripples of both excitement and apprehension through the local community. At the head of this formidable expedition was Professor Evelyn Reed, young, sharp, and radiating an almost intimidating aura of self-assured academic brilliance. Professor Reed was a rising star in the archaeological world. Her work was characterized by an almost exclusive reliance on cutting-edge technology and a fervent dismissal of any methodology that couldn't be quantified by algorithms or verified by digital readouts. She had built her reputation on meticulously documented, technologically driven digs, often in established historical sites, rarely venturing into the murky waters of folklore or local oral histories. For Professor Reed, archaeology was a precise science, and there was no room for intuition or ancient whispers. Professor Reed wasted no time in establishing her authority. During a town hall meeting, ostensibly to introduce her team and their goals, she made it clear that her project was strictly scientific. She subtly, but unmistakably, dismissed Elias's presence in the area, referring to independent hobbyists whose methods were unregulated and often speculative. Her words, carefully chosen, were a direct challenge to Elias's lifetime of work, a dismissive wave towards his entire philosophy of archaeology. A few days later, Carlos Ramirez, ever the earnest advocate for his community's heritage, ventured into Professor Reed's bustling field office. He had heard about the expedition and, encouraged by Elias's quiet conviction, felt a renewed sense of purpose. He found Professor Reed hunched over a laptop, analyzing complex geological data. "Professor Reed," Carlos began, his voice respectful but firm. "My name is Carlos Ramirez. I'm a local here. My family, our ancestors, they have a story, an old legend, about a city under the sand. They say it's in a place we call the Valley of Echoes, not far from here." He pointed hesitantly on a detailed topographical map spread across her table. "It's said to be a place of grand buildings, of a forgotten civilization buried deep." Professor Reed looked up, her expression quickly shifting from professional politeness to thinly veiled condescension. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over Carlos's weathered clothes and earnest, hopeful face. She saw not a custodian of ancient knowledge, but a quaint local clinging to fanciful superstitions. "Mr. Ramirez," she stated, her voice crisp and authoritative. "I appreciate your enthusiasm for local folklore. However, our expedition is based on rigorous scientific methodology, verifiable geological data, and established historical records. There is absolutely no archaeological precedent for a Roman or any comparable ancient civilization existing in the deserts of New Mexico." She let out a soft, dismissive laugh, a sound that cut deeper than any harsh word. "A city under the sand in the Valley of Echoes. That sounds like a charming myth. Mr. Ramirez, a local superstition passed down through generations. And while I respect cultural narratives, Our work is about fact, not folklore. She then picked up a satellite image, pointing to the exact area Carlos had indicated. Our high-resolution satellite imagery and preliminary ground-penetrating radar scans show only barren desert, consistent with the expected geological formations of the region. There are no anomalies that would suggest significant buried structures of any kind, let alone a grand city. This is simply local superstition. Mr. Ramirez, a charming story, but nothing more. We cannot waste precious resources chasing shadows based on myth. Her tone was final, dismissive, clearly designed to shut down any further discussion. Carlos's face fell, a shadow of disappointment crossing his features. He tried to protest, to explain the depth of his family's oral history, but Professor Reed had already turned back to her laptop, effectively dismissing him. The news of Professor Reed's public dismissal of the city under the sand myth, and by extension, of Carlos and the local indigenous stories, quickly reached Elias. He felt a surge of familiar anger, a burning indignation at the arrogance and short-sightedness of the academic world. Professor Reed embodied everything he disdained in modern archaeology, the unyielding faith in technology over intuition, the dismissal of local knowledge, the inability to see beyond established paradigms. Her words were not just an insult to Carlos. They were a direct assault on the very foundation of Elias's lifelong belief that history often resided in the seemingly trivial, the whispered stories, the ignored nuances of a landscape. His own past discoveries, often made through unconventional means, had been met with similar skepticism before being grudgingly accepted. Now, this new generation of archaeologists, epitomized by Reed, was making the same mistake, but on a grander, more public scale. A profound sense of internal conflict gripped Elias. Part of him, the old, tired part, wanted to retreat into his solitude, to let Professor Reed's well-funded team fail on their own terms. What did it matter if another arrogant academic missed a profound truth? But another part, a fierce, unwavering commitment to historical truth and a growing empathy for Carlos's earnest belief, refused to let go. He knew, with a certainty born from his unique talents, that Carlos's story held a kernel of truth. The artifact he'd found years ago, the subtle geological anomalies he'd perceived in the Valley of Echoes during his own solitary expeditions. It all coalesced into a profound conviction. This wasn't just about a lost city. It was about the validation of an entire way of understanding history, a vindication of the knowledge held by generations of indigenous peoples. Carlos, despite Professor Reed's humiliating dismissal, remained undeterred. His faith in his ancestors' stories, now reinforced by Elias's quiet understanding, burned brighter than ever. He visited Elias in his dusty office, his eyes wide with a plea. "Dr. Thorne, they don't believe me, but I know it's there. My grandfather, he always spoke of it. Will you help me? We can prove it. We can find it." He gestured towards his own pickaxe and shovel, simple tools against the backdrop of Reed's high-tech machinery. For Elias, Carlos's unwavering belief, despite the public ridicule, was the final push. The arrogance of Professor Reed, the dismissal of genuine historical clues simply because they didn't fit preconceived notions, it was intolerable. He couldn't go back to his quiet research, not when a profound archaeological secret and the dignity of a local community's heritage hung in the balance. This was the point of no return. He had to commit. He had to act. He would use his unique, almost intuitive connection to the earth, his unconventional methods, to challenge the established academic dogma. He would help Carlos find the truth, not just for the sake of history, but to prove that wisdom could sometimes be found not in the gleaming screens of modernity, but in the whispered echoes of the past, in the very dust that covered forgotten dreams. The quiet scholar was about to embark on a defiant quest, risking his meager reputation for a buried truth. The desert stretched, seemingly infinite and indifferent, under the vast New Mexico sky. For Dr. Elias Thorne, It was not merely sand and rock, but a living archive, a layered history whispering secrets to those attuned enough to hear. Professor Evelyn Reed's well-funded expedition, with its humming ground-penetrating radar and buzzing drones, carved precise, geometrically perfect grids across the landscape, their scientific rigor a stark contrast to the almost spiritual connection Elias felt to the Earth. They sought data. Elias sought dialogue with the past. Despite Professor Reed's dismissive pronouncements, Carlos Ramirez remained steadfast. His belief in the city under the sand was not easily shaken, rooted as it was in generations of oral tradition. He was the catalyst, pushing Elias, for whom the academic dismissal was a profound personal affront. Together, the solitary scholar and the earnest local embarked on their clandestine survey of the Valley of Echoes. It was a remote, parched basin, seemingly unremarkable. Yet to Elias's discerning eye, it hummed with an almost imperceptible resonance. Their methods were a stark departure from the gleaming technology of Reed's team. No high-tech sensors, no satellite imaging. Elias relied on what he called sensory archaeology, a blend of keen observation, geological intuition, and a profound, almost primal connection to the earth beneath his feet. He'd walk the valley floor for hours, his gaze sweeping the ground, not for obvious artifacts, but for subtle anomalies. He'd pause, pressing his ear to the sun-baked earth, listening for variations in its resonant hum. He'd note the way certain hardy desert plants, like the creosote bush, grew in suspiciously straight lines, hinting at buried structures influencing groundwater flow. He even used an antique thermometer, plunging it shallowly into the sand at various points, feeling for minute temperature shifts that might indicate concealed stone foundations radiating stored heat differently than the surrounding soil. It was a slow, meticulous dance with the landscape, a deliberate rejection of speed for depth. "Look here, Carlos," Elias would murmur, pointing to a subtle, almost invisible seam in the cracked clay. The striations in the sedimentation, they're too uniform, too straight. Nature doesn't form patterns like this. Not in these alluvial deposits. Something influenced this flow. Something rigid. Long ago. Carlos, initially observing with a polite skepticism, gradually became captivated. He saw Elias not just as an intellectual, but as a man who felt the earth. He watched as Elias knelt, almost communing with the dust, sifting fine grains through his fingers, inhaling the dry, ancient scent. Elias found minuscule fragments of pottery, not the coarse, utilitarian wares of the local Pueblo or Navajo peoples, but pieces of finer, lighter clay, decorated with geometric patterns and glazes unlike anything native to the Southwest. Each fragment was small, easily dismissed as random debris by the untrained eye, but to Elias, they were undeniable whispers from a forgotten civilization. He carefully placed a particularly smooth, thin shard into a small, velvet-lined box. "This, Carlos," Elias explained, his voice low. "The composition, the firing temperature, it's not from here. It hints at a different technological advancement, a different artistic tradition." He then showed Carlos how the desert floor, seemingly flat, actually held faint, almost imperceptible undulations, patterns that suggested the crumbling of buried walls over millennia. It was a reluctant unveiling, not of a grand show, but of careful, painstaking evidence, forcing Carlos to see the world through Elias's unique lens. Carlos, a man whose life was deeply intertwined with the tangible, saw the world through the lens of geology and mining. Yet, Elias's patient explanations, his uncanny ability to discern patterns where Carlos saw only randomness, began to chip away at his skepticism. He recognized the old man's profound intimacy with the land, an understanding that surpassed his own, despite his lifetime spent on it. "It's like you can see through the ground, Dr. Thorne," Carlos whispered, his voice filled with genuine awe. "Like the desert tells you its secrets." He looked at the fragments, Then, at the subtle lines Elias pointed out, he, too, began to feel a strange resonance, a shift in his perception of the Valley of Echoes. The old tribal legends were starting to feel less like myths and more like forgotten maps. Convinced by Elias's quiet, irrefutable evidence, Carlos Ramirez felt a surge of exhilaration. This was real. This was the city under the sand his ancestors had spoken of. He knew he had to share this, to vindicate Elias and the ancient stories. He returned to Professor Reed's main camp, carrying a small, carefully wrapped collection of the unique pottery shards Elias had found, along with a crude sketch of Elias's perceived underground patterns. "Professor Reed," Carlos said, approaching her tent, his voice brimming with a newfound confidence. "Dr. Thorne and I, we've found something. In the Valley of Echoes, these shards, and the way the land feels, it's different." Professor Reed, however, merely sighed, a theatrical gesture of impatience. She was busy directing a team setting up a new GPR scan, her attention focused squarely on her high-tech instruments. She glanced at the shards Carlos presented, her eyes barely registering them. "Mr. Ramirez," she began, her tone weary. "I thought we settled this. These are likely random debris, perhaps from a nomadic indigenous group, or even modern litter. And the way the land feels. That's hardly scientific methodology." She then launched into a condescending lecture. "Archaeology is not about feelings or folk tales, Mr. Ramirez. It's about quantifiable data, about stratigraphic layers, carbon dating, forensic analysis. Dr. Thorne, bless his antiquated heart, operates on intuition and anecdotal evidence. While perhaps charming for a historical fiction novel, it has no place in serious academia." She even dismissed the unique pottery fragments as unremarkable, perhaps anomalous, but certainly not indicative of a vast, unknown civilization. Unbeknownst to Carlos, or Elias, Professor Reed was also taking active measures to discredit Elias. Later that day, she drafted a scathing email to her departmental head at the university, and carbon-copied a few influential colleagues in the National Archaeological Society. In her email, she detailed Elias's unprofessional and unscientific activities in the Valley of Echoes, accusing him of dabbling in pseudoscientific divinations and undermining legitimate research with outlandish mythological claims. She attached a subtly distorted photograph of Elias's crude map on the boathouse wall, framing it as evidence of his irrational obsession. Her motive was clear: to protect her own reputation, solidify her academic dominance, and prevent any rogue, unconventional discovery from overshadowing her own meticulously planned, technologically driven excavation. She saw Elias as a direct threat to her authority and the paradigm she represented, and she was determined to neutralize him. This brazen act of academic sabotage cemented Professor Reed as the primary Type A antagonist. Her disdain for Elias and Carlos was not just professional disagreement, it was personal, fueled by arrogance and a ruthless ambition to control the narrative. She didn't just dismiss the myth, she actively sought to discredit its proponents, proving her as the true obstacle to historical truth. Her actions, born of professional jealousy and intellectual hubris, inadvertently paved the way for Elias's ultimate dramatic vindication, forcing him from the shadows into the blinding light of discovery. The dust of the Valley of Echoes held secrets, and Elias, with Carlos as his steadfast ally, was determined to unearth them, even if it meant digging against the tide of modern science and academic prejudice. The arid winds of the New Mexico desert seemed to carry more than just dust. They carried the whispers of ancient skepticism and modern arrogance. Professor Evelyn Reed, fresh from her dismissive email to academic circles, felt a surge of professional confidence. Her team, equipped with the latest magnetometers and resistivity meters, was already mapping out their meticulously planned excavation sites, focusing on areas her data deemed promising. She considered Elias Thorne and Carlos Ramirez nothing more than an amusing, if slightly irritating, distraction. Yet, a gnawing unease persisted. The idea that an uncredentialed local and a reclusive, old archaeologist might stumble upon something significant, however remote, pricked at her pride. To preempt any further myth-chasing by Elias and Carlos, and to firmly assert her scientific dominance, Professor Reed made a calculated decision. She announced an expansion of her university's dig site, encompassing a small, previously unallocated section of the Valley of Echoes. Her official reasoning was to conduct a comprehensive geological survey of the entire basin, but her true intention was to systematically prove that the area was archaeologically barren, thus definitively debunking the city under the sand myth. She planned a quick, superficial dig in that specific area, just enough to show nothing of interest, then close it off permanently. This expansive, resource-intensive operation was her gauntlet, a highly visible public arena where modern science, in her eyes, would unequivocally triumph over antiquated folklore. Meanwhile, Elias and Carlos, undeterred by Reed's machinations, continued their quiet, patient work. Elias, guided by his unique methodology, walked the Valley of Echoes like a man possessed. He felt the subtle vibrations in the ground, tracing faint, almost imperceptible lines of compressed earth that suggested ancient foundations. He'd spend hours observing the way the early morning light hit certain depressions, revealing unnatural symmetries beneath the shifting sand dunes. His hands, gnarled but sensitive, would run over exposed rock faces, feeling for unnatural smoothness or chisel marks invisible to the casual eye. He detected minute thermal anomalies in the soil, areas where buried stone would hold and release heat differently from the surrounding sand. He was effectively reading the earth, not with instruments, but with an attuned connection forged over decades. Carlos, his skepticism now entirely replaced by unwavering faith, became Elias's devoted apprentice. He learned to look for the nuances, to feel for the subtle changes in the ground. He trusted Elias implicitly, even when the old archaeologist pointed to seemingly random patches of desert and declared, "Dig here. Carlos, just a little. The earth is singing to me." But their efforts were overshadowed by Reed's imposing presence. Her team, with their heavy machinery and constant activity, was a jarring reminder of their disadvantaged position. Professor Reed would occasionally send her junior archaeologists, eager and condescending, to observe Elias and Carlos, ostensibly for collaboration, but truly to mock their seemingly fruitless, antiquated methods. Still chasing ghost towns, Dr. Thorne, a young, bespectacled archaeologist from Reed's team, would quip, gesturing to Elias's pickaxe, "Our ground-penetrating radar already confirmed this area is virgin soil. You're wasting your time." Elias would merely offer a tight-lipped smile, his focus unwavering. He knew their instruments were blind to the subtle language of the earth that only he understood. He was operating on a different frequency, sensing anomalies that Reed's machines, designed for conventional searches, simply couldn't register. He felt utterly alone in his profound understanding, a prophet in a world that only believed in datasheets. The pressure mounted daily. Professor Reed's project had a strict timeline, driven by grant deadlines and academic prestige. She made it abundantly clear that if her expanded survey of the Valley of Echoes yielded no significant findings within a tight 2-week window, the entire area would be officially deemed archaeologically sterile and permanently closed to further excavation. This looming deadline created a desperate race against time for Elias and Carlos. Every sunset was a stark reminder of the dwindling hours, every grain of sand a precious moment slipping away. If they didn't find undeniable proof of their city before Reed shut down the site, the ancient Roman villa, hinted at by Elias's earlier fragment and Carlos's myth, could remain buried forever, its secrets lost to the ages. Carlos felt the anxiety, too. He worked tirelessly, his shovel biting into the hard-packed earth, but the desert gave up its secrets slowly, grudgingly. "Are you sure?" "Dr. Thorne," he'd ask, wiping sweat from his brow. "We've dug so much, and nothing but rocks. Maybe she's right." "She's not right." "Carlos," Elias would reply, his voice calm, resolute. "The earth speaks in whispers, not shouts. We just need to listen harder. The signs are there. They've always been there. He'd point to a subtle dip in the land, a slight variation in the color of the soil, guiding Carlos with an almost mystical precision. He would emphasize the minute details, the specific patterns of small desert lizards, the way certain indigenous ants built their nests, even the unique scent of the soil at certain depths. These were all tells that Elias, alone among them, knew how to interpret. The relentless sun beat down, turning the valley into a scorching crucible. The lack of visible results amplified the whispers of doubt among the few local residents who had hoped Carlos's stories would prove true. Professor Reed's team watched Elias and Carlos with detached amusement, convinced of their impending failure. Elias felt the immense burden of not just historical discovery, but of validating a lifetime of unconventional wisdom, and of protecting the ancient heritage that Carlos and his ancestors cherished. He was the lone champion of an invisible truth, battling against the overwhelming tide of technological certainty and academic pride, the fate of a lost civilization, and the reputation of a forgotten scholar hung precariously in the balance. A high-stakes gamble against the shifting sands of time. The oppressive heat of the New Mexico desert seemed to intensify with each passing day, mirroring the escalating tension in the Valley of Echoes. Professor Evelyn Reed's team, with their advanced instruments, continued their methodical, yet fruitless resurvey of the expanded dig site. Their ground-penetrating radar screens displayed only the expected geological formations, a frustratingly blank canvas where Professor Reed had expected to find definitive proof of nothing. Her initial confidence was subtly eroding, replaced by a growing irritation at the stubborn barrenness of the land. Elias Thorne, however, felt a different kind of heat, a burning conviction in his gut. He knew the secrets were there, buried deep beneath the unassuming sand. The pressure was immense. The deadline loomed, just days away, threatening to seal the fate of the city under the sand forever. He and Carlos worked tirelessly, their bodies aching, their faces streaked with dust and sweat. Elias no longer just walked the land. He seemed to commune with it, his senses heightened, his focus absolute. He felt the subtle hum of ancient energy beneath the surface, a faint echo of human endeavor from millennia past. He detected a unique, almost metallic scent in the air that no one else seemed to notice, a smell he associated with very old, buried stone. "Here, Carlos," Elias murmured, his voice hoarse from the dry air, pointing to a spot that looked no different from any other. It was a slight depression, barely discernible, where a cluster of sun-baked wildflowers seemed to grow in an unusually geometric pattern. "The earth is loudest here, not a shout, but a sustained whisper. Dig here, slowly, carefully." He wasn't guiding Carlos with precise coordinates, but with an intuitive understanding of invisible forces, of history imprinted on the very landscape. Carlos, his faith unwavering, plunged his shovel into the unyielding earth. His movements were precise, controlled, under Elias's careful direction. Each scoop of dirt, each gentle sweep of Elias's small archaeological brush, was a measured act of patience and hope. Elias would kneel, running his hands over the newly exposed earth, feeling for a change in its texture, its subtle temperature, its hidden stories. His fingers, calloused from years of digging, possessed a surprising sensitivity, detecting the presence of worked stone long before it was visible. He listened to the faint, almost imperceptible shift in the wind's cadence, a signal he believed indicated the presence of large, subsurface voids. Professor Reed, driven by a growing, nagging curiosity despite her dismissive stance, decided to make a personal visit to Elias and Carlos's myth-driven excavation point on the final day of her site evaluation. She arrived with her senior team members, their expressions a mix of condescension and thinly veiled amusement. The sun was at its zenith, beating down mercilessly, turning the air into a shimmering haze. Still at it. "Dr. Thorne," she called out, her voice sharp, cutting through the stillness. "Our final sweeps show nothing. I'm afraid your whispers are just the wind. We'll be commencing backfill operations in a few hours." Her tone was laced with a triumphant finality, a clear declaration of Elias's imminent failure. Her team exchanged smug glances. This was the moment she had anticipated, the quiet, conclusive debunking of Elias's methods. Carlos, shoveling steadily, felt a cold dread creep into his heart. He glanced at Elias, who remained focused, his eyes closed for a moment, head tilted, as if listening to an inaudible frequency. This was the moment when all seemed lost. The weight of time, of scientific dismissal, of his own ancestral stories being branded as mere superstition, pressed down on him. Even Elias's determined face showed a flicker of profound concentration, an almost desperate intensity, as he tried to pull the last elusive truth from the unwilling earth. Then, with a dull thud, Carlos's shovel hit something hard, something unyielding and distinctly unnatural. It wasn't the familiar resistance of bedrock or a large boulder. It was a flat, smooth surface. He looked up at Elias, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning hope. Professor Reed scoffed. "Probably just another rock, Mr. Ramirez. Or perhaps a piece of buried farm equipment. This area is known for its agricultural past, not its Roman heritage." Her words were sharp, dismissing the find before it could even be properly assessed. Her team smirked, confident in her pronouncement, but Elias didn't react. He was already on his knees, his archaeological brush appearing almost magically in his hand. His movements, usually slow and deliberate, were now swift, precise, almost frenzied. He swept away the loose sand, his face inches from the ground, his breath held. Slowly, painstakingly, a distinct corner of something began to emerge. It was too regular, too perfectly shaped to be natural. The material itself was unusual, a reddish-brown, fine-grained stone, subtly different from the local sandstone. Then, with a final, delicate sweep, a pattern emerged. Not just stone, but a fragment of an intricately arranged mosaic, composed of tiny, brightly colored tesserae, a stylized acanthus leaf, vibrant even after centuries buried beneath the desert. The distinct, unmistakable artistry of Roman mosaic work. A stunned silence fell over the Valley of Echoes. The chirping of cicadas, the rustle of the dry brush, the distant hum of Reed's machinery, all faded into irrelevance. Professor Reed, who had been standing with her arms crossed, a smug expression on her face, froze. Her eyes, initially dismissive, widened impossibly. Her jaw dropped. The vibrant color of the mosaic, unmistakable against the drab desert floor, slapped her with the force of undeniable truth. Her meticulously constructed world of quantifiable data and dismissive academic superiority shattered in that single, profound moment. Her face, a moment before composed in haughty dismissal, crumbled into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, then a dawning, terrible realization. Whispers, then gasps, erupted from Professor Reed's team. They scrambled forward, their own high-tech gear forgotten, their eyes fixed on the impossible discovery. A mosaic Roman. Here it can't be but the models, the radar. Their disbelief was palpable, quickly turning to awe. Professor Reed stood transfixed, her gaze oscillating between the unearthed mosaic and Elias Thorne. The man she had ridiculed, the myth chaser, had just unearthed a discovery that would rewrite history books, a find that dwarfed anything her state-of-the-art expedition had achieved. Her face, once a picture of academic pride, was now contorted with a mixture of profound embarrassment, bitter envy, and a searing, undeniable remorse. Her own arrogance had blinded her to the truth, leading her to dismiss the very thing she claimed to seek. In that moment, surrounded by her dumbfounded team, Professor Reed's professional world collapsed, and Elias Thorne, the forgotten scholar, received his profound public vindication. The desert, in its silent wisdom, had spoken, and Elias had finally made the world listen. The Valley of Echoes, once a desolate expanse of sand and myth, now hummed with an entirely different kind of energy. The vibrant Roman mosaic, glinting under the New Mexico sun, was undeniable proof. A breathtaking testament to a history no academic had dared to dream of. The revelation sent shockwaves through the archaeological community, and the immediate aftermath for those involved was as dramatic as the discovery itself. For Professor Evelyn Reed, the fallout was swift and devastating. Her initial report to her prestigious university, confidently declaring the Valley of Echoes archaeologically sterile, was now directly contradicted by irrefutable evidence. The photographs of the mosaic, circulating globally within hours, became a stark emblem of her colossal misjudgment. Her academic rivals, who had long chafed under her aggressive ambition and dismissal of traditional methods, seized the opportunity. The university swiftly launched a full internal investigation into her conduct, particularly focusing on her public dismissal of local knowledge and her thinly veiled attempts to discredit Dr. Elias Thorne. Her reputation, once gleaming and unassailable, crumbled overnight. She was immediately stripped of her position as lead archaeologist for the New Mexico expedition and faced a looming academic ethics inquiry that threatened to end her career. She lost her grants. Her research team was disbanded, and her name, once synonymous with cutting-edge archaeology, was now whispered with scorn and pity. Her downfall was complete, a public humiliation commensurate with her earlier arrogance. For the misguided members of Professor Reed's team, those who had scoffed alongside her or dismissed Elias's methods, the revelation was a sobering, humbling experience. The sheer awe of the discovery, combined with the swift fall of their leader, forced them to confront their own biases. Many of the junior archaeologists, eager to learn and genuinely fascinated by the new possibilities Elias's methods presented, approached him with sincere apologies. A young graduate student named Dr. Lena Sharma, who had initially been skeptical but always retained a spark of open-mindedness, became a particularly vocal advocate for Elias. She publicly acknowledged her team's errors and praised Elias's profound intuition. Some even offered their time and expertise to help Elias and Carlos with the initial, painstaking work of clearing the sand from the newly found villa, eager to contribute to such a groundbreaking project. Their remorse was genuine, expressed not just in words but in their willingness to learn and assist. Meanwhile, news of the lost Roman villa, dubbed the Villa Augusta Antiqua by initial reports, exploded across global media. Television crews, newspaper reporters, and curious tourists flocked to truth or consequences. And at the center of it all was Dr. Elias Thorne, no longer the forgotten scholar, but the undisputed visionary. His phone, once silent for years, now rang incessantly with calls from prestigious universities, world-renowned museums, and documentary filmmakers. Within weeks, a formal offer arrived from the Smithsonian Institution in collaboration with the University of New Mexico. Elias was appointed director of the Villa Augusta Antiqua excavation project, with unprecedented authority and virtually unlimited funding. This was more than just a job. It was the culmination of his life's work, a vindication that transcended mere professional recognition. He was given full autonomy to lead the excavation using his unique sensory archaeology methods, unburdened by rigid academic protocols. He could finally apply his theories on a grand scale, proving that intuition and a deep connection to the land were as valid as any technological scan. This opportunity wasn't just material. It was the chance to unearth a significant piece of forgotten history, to reshape understanding, and to leave an indelible mark on the archaeological world. Weeks after the initial shock and the immediate whirlwind of media attention, Elias and Carlos Ramirez found a rare moment of quiet at the dig site. The newly exposed mosaic, now protected by a temporary canopy, shimmered under the afternoon sun, its colors vibrant against the arid landscape. They sat on two folding chairs, sipping lukewarm water, looking down at the ancient Roman brickwork that was slowly emerging from beneath millennia of sand. "It's incredible." "Elias," Carlos said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "My grandfather always believed it. But to see it, to touch it, they said it was just a myth. And you saw it when no one else could." Elias smiled, a faint, contented smile that reached his eyes. His gaze was distant, as if still communing with the layers of history beneath them. The Earth. Carlos. She has her own language, he replied, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. She whispers her secrets to those who bother to listen, to those who are humble enough not to think they know everything. He paused, then continued, his voice taking on a reflective quality. Professor Reed. She believed her machines knew everything. She saw the land as something to be scanned, to be analyzed with algorithms. But history breathes. Carlos. It lives in the stories, in the subtle shifts of the soil, in the echoes that linger long after the stones fall silent. You cannot capture that on a radar screen. Carlos nodded, his eyes fixed on the mosaic. My grandpa always said that the old stories held the truest maps. I guess he was right. He was... Carlos, Elias affirmed, his hand gently patting the ancient brickwork. And we are merely the ones who learned to read them. This villa, it's not just a collection of old stones. It's a testament to the fact that truth, no matter how deeply buried or how long dismissed as myth, will always find a way to surface if you are patient enough and respectful enough to listen. Their conversation was a quiet, profound resolution, acknowledging not only the massive discovery, but also the vindication of a lifetime's worth of unconventional wisdom. It celebrated the partnership between the academic and the local, bridging the gap between scientific inquiry and traditional knowledge. The new calm settled over the site, promising a future of respectful discovery and shared understanding. 5 years later, the Valley of Echoes. Once a remote, sun-baked basin known only for whispers of local folklore, had been utterly transformed. It was no longer just an archaeological dig site, but a vibrant, bustling international archaeological park and museum. Sleek, modern visitor centers blended seamlessly with the ancient, newly excavated structures. Tours wound through the carefully preserved remains of the Villa Augusta Antiqua, its vibrant mosaics and sturdy Roman brickwork now protected by climate-controlled enclosures. Dr. Elias Thorne, no longer the forgotten scholar, was its celebrated director, a global figure whose name was now synonymous with revolutionary discovery and a profound respect for unconventional wisdom. Elias's days were a fulfilling tapestry of research, teaching, and public engagement. He was no longer confined to a dusty office, but walked among the ruins he had unearthed, his presence radiating a quiet authority. He lectured at prestigious universities worldwide, his once dismissed methods now heralded as pioneering. Students from across the globe flocked to Truth or Consequences to study under him, eager to learn his unique blend of sensory archaeology and scientific rigor. He lived a life of profound meaning and contentment, surrounded by a dedicated team of colleagues, including the now highly respected Dr. Delina Sharma, and the unwavering companionship of Carlos Ramirez, who served as the park's chief liaison to the local community. Elias was loved and respected, not just for his intellect, but for his humility and the way he honored the land and its people. Elias knew that his discovery was more than just an academic triumph. It was a testament to the power of overlooked narratives. This conviction fueled his desire to pay it forward. He established the Heritage and Echoes program in direct partnership with local indigenous tribes. The program's mission was deeply personal to Elias to meticulously document, preserve, and research the oral histories, legends, and traditional ecological knowledge of the native peoples, especially those stories connected to historical sites and the natural landscape. He firmly believed that every myth, every legend, contained a kernel of historical truth, a piece of the past waiting to be understood. Through the program, Elias organized regular workshops and symposia, inviting tribal elders to share their ancestral knowledge with young archaeologists and students. These gatherings fostered an unprecedented bridge between Western science and indigenous wisdom, transforming academic research into a collaborative, respectful endeavor. He ensured that the traditional stories were not just recorded, but were also integrated into the interpretive exhibits at the Villa Augusta Antiqua, giving voice to the generations who had preserved the memory of the lost city. One radiant autumn afternoon, as the setting sun cast long, golden shadows over the meticulously preserved Roman walls, Elias Thorne stood on a newly constructed observation deck overlooking the excavated villa. His hair, now almost entirely white, caught the light, giving him an almost ethereal glow. He wasn't wielding a shovel or a brush anymore, but gesturing towards a section of an ancient fresco, its vibrant colors still visible after 2 millennia. Beside him stood Carlos Ramirez, his face beaming with pride, and a small group of attentive young archaeologists from the Heritage and Echoes program. "Look closely at this symbolism," Elias explained, his voice rich with experience, pointing to a peculiar, almost abstract pattern within the fresco. The conventional interpretation suggests it's merely decorative, but when you listen to the local Pueblo narratives about water spirits and desert survival, and combine that with the geological signs of an ancient underground spring network here, it tells a different story, a deeper story. This isn't just art, it's a map, a testament to how closely these ancient Romans, in their own way, had learned to live with and understand this harsh, beautiful land. He turned to his students, his eyes, still sharp and profound, reflecting the desert's ancient wisdom. Remember, true archaeology isn't just about what you dig up. It's about what you listen for. The land whispers. The myths echo. It's our job to silence our own preconceptions and hear them. Elias Thorne was no longer merely the man who found a lost Roman villa. He was the man who found the voice of the past, silenced by centuries of sand and skepticism, and taught the world how to listen to its echoes. His legacy was not just the unearthed stones of the Villa Augusta Antiqua, but the vibrant, living bridge he had built between forgotten truths and future understanding. As the last rays of sunlight bathed the ancient ruins in a warm, knowing glow, Elias stood, not just an archaeologist, but a guardian, a connector, a living legend, his eyes bright with the endless secrets still buried in the earth, waiting for humble ears to hear.